Welcome to the deep dive.
Great to be here.
So, our mission today really is to cut through all the noise. We want to zero in on what might be the single most important action for creating, genuine lasting value.
Right.
We've got this fascinating stack of source material that really challenges how we think about innovation, about competition, even about planning for the future.
It all centers on this one crucial idea, a single distinction, really.
Which is what? The difference between just copying success and actually creating it from scratch.
Exactly. And that's the fundamental starting point for understanding progress itself. I mean, if you look at the world, all advancement can be sorted into two types.
Okay.
First, you have what's called horizontal progress. This is basically replication. You take something that works and you make more of it. It takes the world from 1 to N.
Adding more of the familiar. And the big macro word for that is globalization, right?
It's the one.
We saw this so clearly with China's economic boom over the last few decades. It was this massive national project to just replicate the successful infrastructure of the West. 20th century highways, 19th century railroads.
Entire cities built on existing models.
Yeah.
If you want a mechanical analogy, it's like taking one brilliant invention, say the typewriter, and then just building 100 more exactly like it.
Okay, so that's 1 to N. What's the other type?
Well, the other type is the much harder challenge. That's vertical progress. This is the leap from 0 to 1.
The act of creation.
The act of creation, building something totally new, completely unique. And the word for this type of progress is technology.
And we should be clear, when we say technology, we're not just talking about computers and silicon chips.
No, not at all. It's a much broader definition. Technology is any new and better way of doing things. So in our analogy, the real leap isn't building more typewriters, it's taking that typewriter and inventing the word processor.
Which fundamentally changes everything. And this vertical progress, this 0 to 1 leap, our sources call it a miracle, which, sounds a little dramatic.
It does, but when you think about the alternative, it starts to make sense. Any company, any nation really, that wants to escape this inertia of just fine-tuning old models, they need hundreds, maybe thousands of these technological miracles.
Because technology lets us do more with less. It's like rewriting the world's operating system.
And if you don't have that, if you're just following best practices and copying what came before, you're pretty much guaranteed to hit a dead end.
So that leads us to the mental framework you need for this, which is contrarian thinking.
You have to start by questioning everything. The core question, the filter for all of this is, what important truth do very few people agree with you on?
That is such a hard question to answer. I mean, the sources point out it's a double-edged sword, isn't it?
How?
Well, it's intellectually difficult because everything we learn in school is, by definition, agreed upon wisdom. But it's also psychologically difficult because you have to knowingly say something that's unpopular, something that might even sound strange.
Right. And that's why a good answer has to take a very specific form. It's always, most people believe in X, but the truth is the opposite of X.
Okay, so what's the author's own answer to this question? The big one that underpins this whole deep dive.
It's a direct contrast of those two types of progress we just talked about.
Let's hear it.
Most people think the future of the world will be defined by globalization, but the truth is that technology matters more.
And if we just keep relying on globalization, on that 1 to N horizontal progress, we're heading for a collapse.
We are, because if a country like China simply copies the U.S. path, doubles its energy production with old tools, it doubles its air pollution, it speeds up global scarcity.
And if every household in India starts living like Americans do right now, using only today's tools, the result is an environmental catastrophe.
That's scary to say.
It's unsustainable.
Spreading old ways to create wealth globally ends in scarcity, not universal prosperity. So the challenge for the century isn't replication, it's radical reinvention, that 0 to 1 shift.
So, if reinvention is so critical, why is it so hard for us today? To understand that, we have to look back at the moment that really cemented our modern aversion to risk.
The dot-com crash.
The dot-com crash of the early 2000s.
You really have to set the stage for that. The 90s started with all this euphoria after the Berlin Wall fell, but that soured pretty quickly. We had a slow recession, manufacturing jobs were disappearing.
A lot of anxiety about globalization. Things felt kind of stagnant.
Until the internet just exploded. You had the Mosaic browser in 93, then the Netscape IPO in 95.
The market just went wild. The valuations for companies like Yahoo and Amazon, they were astronomical. And this was all happening against a pretty unstable global backdrop, right?
Oh, yeah. You had the Asian financial crisis in 97, the Russian ruble crisis in 98, and then the near collapse of the U.S. hedge fund LTCM, long-term capital management.
Right, which needed this massive multi-billion-dollar bailout just to keep the whole financial system from going under.
So the rest of the world looked like it was falling apart, and the new economy, by default, seemed like the only thing left that was actually growing.
And that's what created the mania.
The dot-com mania, 18 months of just pure insanity. From September 98 to March 2000. It was a time when the most successful startups had these, anti-business models.
Burn through capital, get users, and assume profits will magically show up later.
Exactly. There's this incredible story in the sources about a South Korean firm that wired PayPal $5 million without even signing any paperwork.
Seriously.
Yeah. The thinking was that the speed of getting the money was more important than the security of a contract. That's how frenzied it was.
And of course, that kind of irrational exuberance can't last. The Nasdaq Q peaked at over 5,000 in March 2000.
And by late 2002, it had crashed down to around 1,100.
And the public interpretation of that was basically a divine judgment, a reckoning against all that technological optimism. The era of big, bold bets was over.
And what rose from that rubble were four very powerful, very entrenched dogmas that I think still quietly shape how a lot of people think about building new things. These were the mental shields that the survivors in Silicon Valley put up.
So they wouldn't be seen as the next big flameout. Okay, let's break them down. Dogma number 1. Since big visions inflated the bubble, the new wisdom was make incremental advances.
Be humble, take small steps, it feels safe, it gives you these immediate, tangible benchmarks, and you avoid the ridicule of shooting for the moon and missing.
But the contrarian truth is...
What? The contrarian truth is that it is better to risk boldness than triviality. If you're only making a 10% improvement on something that already exists, you're marginal. And marginal improvements are really hard and expensive to sell. You're not escaping competition.
Okay, so that leads to dogma number 2. Stay lean and flexible. Planning was seen as arrogant, as the thing that led companies right off a cliff. So the new mantra was iterate.
Yeah, treat entrepreneurship as agnostic experimentation. Just try stuff.
But iteration without a clear goal is just reacting.
Exactly. The contrarian truth here is that a bad plan is better than no plan. A company aiming for a 0 to 1 breakthrough can't be run by an indefinite optimist. You need a definite, bold plan, even a rough one. It gives you a target. Otherwise, you're just adapting to the world as it is, not designing a new one.
Dogma 3. Improve on the competition. This seems logical. Start with an existing market, make the product a little better, a little cheaper.
And here we hit the central paradox, which is that competitive markets destroy profits. If your only goal is to one-up the competition, you're locking yourself into this endless existential battle that just grinds away any chance of accumulating capital, which is, kind of the whole point of capitalism.
Right. And the last one, dogma number 4. Focus on product, not sales. This is the classic engineer's dream, isn't it? If you build a great product, it should just sell itself. Advertising is wasteful.
The if you build it, they will come fallacy. But the hard truth is that sales matters just as much as product. We so dramatically underestimate the importance of distribution, everything it takes to actually sell a product.
So poor sales is the real killer.
It's the #1 cause of startup failure, not bad product. The idea that a product just sells itself is a comforting delusion, usually held by people who are, frankly, just not very good at selling things.
And the early PayPal story is a perfect example of this, isn't it?
It is. Their first product, beaming money between Palm Pilots, was a technical marvel, but nobody needed it. When they switched to email payments, growth was still slow. They realized they had to hit critical mass, and fast.
And that required a massive, expensive sales effort.
They ended up literally paying customers. $10 to sign up and another $10 for every referral. It was wildly expensive, totally irrational from a certain point of view. But they knew they needed that 1999-style hubris, that bold move, to escape the competitive trap and get the scale they needed to be profitable later on. To build the next great companies, we have to unlearn those lessons from the crash.
Okay, to pivot from caution back to, well, necessary boldness, it leads us right into this core business paradox. The difference between creating value and capturing value.
Right. We're moving from that big philosophical contrarian question to the business version of it, which is what valuable company is nobody building?
And it's a tricky area because a company can create a ton of value for society without actually becoming valuable itself.
That's the key. Creating value is essential, but it's not enough. You also have to be able to capture some of that value.
The sources use this brilliant example, the U.S. airline industry. They create hundreds of billions of dollars in value. They connect people, they enable business, but their profitability.
It's terrible. In 2012, the average airfare was about $178. The airlines made just 37 cents in profit per passenger.
37 cents.
They created all this value for the world, but captured almost none of it. Now, contrast that with Google.
Right.
In that same period, Google's revenue was about $50 billion, way less than the airlines' $160 billion, but Google kept 21% of that as profit. That's a profit margin more than 100 times bigger than the airline industries.
Wow. And the result is that Google is now worth, what, 3 times more than every U.S. airline combined?
Exactly. And that difference comes down to two models: perfect competition and monopoly. In perfect competition, every company is basically the same, selling the same thing, so profits always get competed away.
But a monopoly owns its market. It sets its own price. It can actually make a profit.
And here's the really revolutionary insight from the source material. Capitalism and competition are opposites.
Wait, hold on. That goes against everything we're taught. We learned that capitalism is built on competition.
That's the conventional wisdom. But the sources argue that capitalism requires capital accumulation. And perfect competition, by its very nature, destroys the ability to accumulate capital. So the lesson for an entrepreneur is crystal clear. If you want to create and capture lasting value, you have to build a business that is unique, a creative monopoly.
So the world is more binary than we think. You're either much closer to perfect competition or much closer to a monopoly than the business press ever lets on.
And because of that, companies have to disguise their true status.
How do they do that?
Well, you have the monopoly lie. Monopolists always downplay their dominance to avoid regulation and scrutiny. Google is a perfect example. They would never say they're a monopoly. They frame themselves as this small player in a huge tech market: search, plus mobile phones, plus self-driving cars.
To disguise the fact that, 95% of their revenue still comes from search, where they're completely dominant.
Precisely. And then you have the flip side, the competitive lie. This is where non-monopolists exaggerate how unique they are just to survive.
This feels like the more common trap for new entrepreneurs.
It's the most fatal mistake, defining your market so narrowly that you dominate it by definition.
Like the Palo Alto British restaurant example.
Exactly. You can tell yourself you have a monopoly on British food in Palo Alto, but the real market is the Palo Alto restaurant market, which is brutally competitive. You're fooling yourself, and you lose sight of the fact that your costs, rent, labor, ingredients are all determined by that competitive market. You can't escape it.
And that relentless competitive pressure forces companies into this horrible choice: either be ruthless or die.
It does. It dictates everything. A non-monopolist just can't afford to think about ethics or long-term plans because they're totally focused on today's margins. There's this tragic story about Bernard Loiseau, the famous French chef with 3 Michelin stars.
What happened?
The sources say he committed suicide after a competing guide threatened to downgrade his restaurant. That's the kind of insane pressure competition creates.
That's just a brutal illustration of what that stress does to your ability to think long-term.
And that's why creative monopolies are actually a good thing for society. A true monopolist, an innovator, has the freedom to care about its workers, its products, its impact on the world. They're not stuck in that existential fight for survival.
Apple's monopoly profits from the iPhone weren't from cornering some static market.
No, they were the reward for creating something new, something that was an order of magnitude better. The whole history of progress is just a series of better monopoly businesses replacing the old ones. It brings us to that great inversion of Tolstoy's opening line.
All happy companies are different. Each one earns a monopoly by solving a unique problem. All failed companies are the same. They failed to escape competition.
So if that's the goal, how do you build a monopoly that actually lasts? There are 4 key characteristics.
The first is proprietary technology. It has to be hard to replicate. And the rule of thumb is that it needs to be at least 10 times better than the closest substitute. Anything less is just a marginal improvement.
And you can get to 10x by inventing something totally new, or just by radically improving existing solution. PayPal made eBay transactions 10x faster. Amazon offered 10x more books than any physical store. Apple's iPad made tablets, which were basically unusable before, 10x more usable.
Okay, number 2 is network effects. The product gets more useful as more people use it. Facebook is the classic example. But there's a paradox here, isn't there?
there is. For network effects to kick in, the product has to be valuable to its very first users when the network is tiny.
Which is why they have to start with a really small, targeted market.
Exactly. Facebook didn't launch to the whole world, it launched only to Harvard students. That ensured immediate critical mass in that tiny network. Then you have economies of scale. A monopoly gets stronger as it gets bigger because its fixed costs get spread out. This is huge for software companies, where the marginal cost of another copy is almost zero.
And the final one is branding. A strong brand protects the monopoly, but the sources give a pretty stark warning here.
Brand alone is dangerous. Apple's brand is powerful, but it's built on top of proprietary tech, scale, and network effects. You saw the danger with Marissa Mayer at Yahoo, trying to revive it by just changing the logo and making the guy cool. Without a 10x product underneath, it's just window dressing.
So, with the goal set on building a durable, creative monopoly, we have to talk about strategy. How do you actually do it?
The main rule is it's deceptively simple. Start small and monopolize.
Always err on the side of starting too small. That sounds counterintuitive.
It does, but it's much easier to dominate a tiny market than to fight for a tiny slice of a big one. The biggest red flag in a business pitch is when someone says their goal is to get 1% of a $100 billion market.
Why is that a red flag?
Because a market that big already has vicious competition. It's a sign that you haven't defined a small enough starting point to actually dominate. Your share will be competed down to zero.
So again, PayPal's the model here. Their first product for Palm Pilots was too broad.
Way too broad. Their success came when they decided to dominate one tiny, specific niche, eBay power sellers. A few thousand super high-volume users. They focused all their energy there and got 25% market share in just a few months. That's conquest.
And once you've conquered that niche, you scale up into adjacent markets.
Amazon is the textbook case. They started with books, easy to ship, millions of titles. Then they moved to CDs, then videos, and just kept expanding until they became the world's general store. Even their name, Amazon, was a nod to that strategy.
This all points toward a different goal than we usually hear about. Not first mover advantage, but
Last mover advantage. Being first is just a tactic. It's not the goal. What really matters is being the last mover, making the last great development in a market, and then enjoying decades of monopoly profits. Business is like chess. You have to study the end game first.
And this whole strategy depends on a huge philosophical shift, moving from an indefinite view of the future to a definite one. Is success luck, or is it skill and planning?
Right. And since you can't really run A/B tests on companies, it really comes down to your attitude. If you see the future as this indefinite random thing, you give up on planning. You just try to maximize your options.
Which leads to what you see with so many students today. They build these incredibly diverse resumes, preparing them for nothing in particular, this idea of being well-rounded.
It's a hedge against a future they don't believe they can actually shape. A definite view, on the other hand, favors strong convictions. Planning. Striving to be a monopoly of one by mastering one specific thing.
And this outlook can define entire civilizations. The sources outline 4 different views of the future. Let's start with indefinite pessimism. That's modern Europe.
Yeah, the expectation is slow, creeping decline. There's no grand plan, so they just react to events. This leads to this obsession with leisure, vacation mania, while the government just kicks the can down the road.
Then you have definite pessimism. That's modern China.
They expect the future will be bleak with resource constraints and so on, but they work like crazy to execute very definite plans. And that plan is globalization. Copy the West, build factories, burn coal. They take the future seriously, even if they're pessimistic about it.
And then there's the one that used to define the West. Definite optimism.
Right. This was the dominant view from the 17th century all the way up to about the 1970s. People expected the future to be better, and they had specific plans to make it so. This is the view that gave us the Empire State Building, the Golden Gate Bridge, the Apollo program.
They were actively building the future they envisioned.
But then, around 1982, America shifted hard into indefinite optimism. We expect things to get better, but we have no specific plan for how. We just rely on randomness and diversification.
And that's why finance became the default career path for so many smart graduates.
Exactly. Instead of inventing new things, they rearrange old things. Bankers rearrange capital. Lawyers resolve disputes over old things. You go to Wall Street precisely because you don't have a specific plan. It offers unlimited optionality.
So this idea of progress without planning, it's really just evolution. Or Darwinism. And you see that in the lean startup methodology, all this endless iteration and adaptation.
But the sources are really critical of applying Darwinism to business. Iteration is great for polishing a product, but it will never get you from 0 to 1. For that, you need intelligent design, a careful, definite plan. You have to start with the answer to that contrarian question.
Steve Jobs is the ultimate example of this definite optimism.
Absolutely. He wasn't just designing a product, he was designing an entire business, an entire ecosystem. He had these definite multi-year plans for the iPod, then the iPhone, then the iPad. He wasn't reacting to focus groups, he was executing a specific vision for a new reality.
And that definite plan is why a company like Facebook could turn down $1 billion offer from Yahoo back in 2006.
Zuckerberg had a concrete vision of where the company was going. Yahoo didn't. A business with a good, definite plan will always be underrated by a world that sees the future as random.
Okay, now we have to get into one of the most powerful concepts in this whole deep dive, which is the power law. It's something that governs reality, but it's so hard for us to grasp because we're all trained to think in, normal distributions, bell curves.
Right. The power law, or the 80-20 rule, basically says that a very small number of things account for the vast majority of the results. The biggest cities dwarf the small towns. The most powerful earthquakes outweigh all the others combined. Success is just massively, massively skewed.
And nowhere is this more clear than in venture capital.
That's the perfect laboratory for it. VC returns follow a power law, not a normal distribution. Most companies they invest in fail, and the returns are overwhelmingly driven by a tiny handful of massive hits.
The Founders Fund example is incredible. Facebook was the single best investment in their 2005 fund.
And it returned more money than all the other investments in that fund combined. Second best company, Palantir, was on track to return more than the sum of every investment except for Facebook.
That's just a staggering distribution. And it forces VCs to adopt these two rules that seem totally crazy in any other part of finance. Rule 1.
Only invest in companies that have the potential to return the value of the entire fund.
That just eliminates almost everything.
It does. Think about it. If you have $1 billion fund, you literally cannot be interested in a company that's only going to be worth $100 million. Even if it's a huge success, it doesn't move the needle for your fund.
Yeah.
You have to be chasing those multi-billion-dollar outcomes every single time.
Which leads to Rule 2. Because Rule 1 is so restrictive, there can't be any other rules.
The danger is diversification. It sounds smart, but if you spread your money too thin hoping to hedge, you'll almost certainly end up with a portfolio of flops and no hits. You'll miss the one that matters.
The math on this is just wild. Andreessen Horowitz invested $250,000 in Instagram. Facebook bought it, and they made $78 million, a 312x return. Amazing.
Sounds amazing. But because their fund was $1.5 billion, the sources calculate they would have needed 19 Instagrams just to break even. Wow.
It just shows you have to find that handful of 0 to 1 companies and back them with everything you have.
And this power law, it applies to us as individuals, too. In our careers, in our lives, we're all investors of our time and energy.
And you can't diversify your life. You can't run 10 different careers at once. So the takeaway for you, the listener, is that you have to think really hard about where your efforts will fall on that curve.
We're taught the opposite in school. Be well-rounded, don't specialize too much.
But the power law shows that the differences between companies are far, far greater than the differences in roles inside companies. The bottom line is this. Owning just 0.01% of Google is infinitely more valuable than owning 100% of a company that fails.
So you have to focus relentlessly on something you're good at, but first, you have to think hard about whether that thing is going to be valuable in the future.
And if you have a good answer to that contrarian question, that important truth few people agree on, then that answer is a secret. Something important, unknown, hard, but doable. We tend to think all the big secrets have been found already, that all the hard problems have been solved.
And that belief is dangerous. It leads to this cultural malaise where people just sort of recycle old ideas because they don't think real invention is possible anymore.
And there are 4 big social trends that reinforce this disbelief in secrets. First, incrementalism.
Right. Academia rewards small, safe publications over big, risky leaps. It's safer. Second is risk aversion. We're all so afraid of failing publicly that we don't even try to find unpopular truths.
Third is complacency. The elites who have the most freedom to explore new ideas are often the ones with the least incentive to upset the status quo.
And fourth is flatness. This idea of globalization, the belief that if there was a secret out there, some genius in Shanghai or Munich would have found it already. It discourages you from looking in your own backyard.
And you can see the real-world consequences of this. Look at the decline of a giant like Hewlett-Packard. The board basically decided new technology was beyond their competence and just became night watchmen, focused on audits instead of invention.
But there are still secrets out there. We just have to look for them. There are two kinds, really.
Right.
There are secrets of nature, the physical world, things physicists look for, and then there are secrets about people, things we don't know about ourselves or things we hide.
And a great place to look is where nobody else is looking, like nutrition. It's hugely important to everyone, but it's not really institutionalized like physics is. The fact that the official food pyramid actually made the obesity epidemic worse shows there's this huge gap in our knowledge. A perfect place to hunt for a secret.
And then you have companies like Airbnb or Uber. They were built on secrets about people hidden in plain sight. The secret that people had spare capacity, empty rooms, empty seats in their cars, and were willing to share them.
A great company is basically a conspiracy to change the world, built around one of these secrets. Okay, so we found our secret, we have our conspiracy, now we have to execute. And this brings us to what the sources call Thiel's law.
Right, which is that a startup messed up at its foundation cannot be fixed. The early decisions you make are like pouring concrete. Once they're set, they are incredibly hard to change.
And the very first decision is the most important. Choosing your co-founders.
It's like getting married. And founder conflict is just as messy and destructive as a divorce. The key is that founders have to share a prehistory. They can't be strangers who just met at a networking event. They need that deep underlying trust.
Once the team is set, you have to get the structure right. And that means aligning three different things. Ownership, which is the equity.
Possession, who's running the day-to-day operations.
And control, which is the board of directors.
And when those three are misaligned, you get total paralysis. The perfect example is the DMV. The citizens own it, the bureaucrats have possession, and nobody really has effective control. So nobody has any incentive to make it better.
To manage control in a startup, the key is to keep the board small.
As small as possible. 3 is ideal, never more than 5. A big board just provides cover for one person to act like a micro-dictator because there's no real oversight.
And on compensation and culture, the approach has to be all in. Everyone full-time.
You're either on the bus or off the bus.
Yep.
Part-timers and consultants have different incentives. They're trying to claim value now, not create it for the long term.
And one of the most counterintuitive points is that a company does better the less it pays its CEO in cash, a salary of no more than $150,000. Why is that?
Because a high salary incentivizes the CEO to protect the status quo, to protect their salary. A low salary, combined with a ton of equity, forces them to focus only on increasing the company's long-term value. That's where their real reward will come from.
So cash is about claiming value short-term, but equity is about creating value long-term.
Exactly. But you have to be careful with it. Because perfect fairness and equity is impossible, the details of who owns what should be kept secret. An open spreadsheet of everyone's equity would be like a nuclear bomb in the office. It just creates resentment.
And for hiring, you can't outsource it. You have to have a specific answer to the question, why should the 20th employee join your company?
And the answer can't be generic stuff like, we have smart people. It has to be about your unique mission, your specific conspiracy. The culture itself should be like a cult light.
Fanatically right about something that the rest of the world overlooks.
And to keep internal conflict down, every single person needs to be assigned to one unique thing. That way, people aren't competing with each other for the same responsibilities. It prevents the company from attacking itself.
So once you have the foundation right, you have to master the other half of business, the part engineers always forget.
Sales and distribution. The field of dreams idea, build it and they will come, is a fatal delusion.
So why do engineers who are so rational, so consistently undervalue something as critical as sales?
Because sales seems irrational. It's an art, it's a performance, it's not the clean binary truth of code. And good sales is always hidden. Salespeople are called account executives or investment bankers. The whole system is designed to make it look like sales isn't happening, which makes it seem trivial.
But just like everything else, distribution follows a power law. One channel has to dominate. The simple formula is that customer lifetime value, or CLV, has to be greater than customer acquisition cost, or CAC.
And you can map the channels on a spectrum. At the very high end, you have complex sales, 7-figure deals. This needs the CEO's personal attention. Think Elon Musk getting billion-dollar contracts from NASA.
Then you have personal sales for deals in the $10,000 to $100,000 range. This is about building a sales team with a repeatable process.
In between those two is the dead zone. A product that costs about $1,000 is often impossible to sell. It's too cheap to justify a salesperson, but too expensive for traditional advertising to work. It's a marketing black hole.
And then for cheaper products, you have marketing and advertising.
Right, for mass market stuff that doesn't really have a viral component. And at the far end, you have viral marketing, where the product itself is the distribution channel. Facebook, PayPal.
And PayPal's early growth hack, paying people to sign up, was an extreme form of this. It created 7% daily growth.
Which was only sustainable because they focused it like a laser on that one niche where money moved fast, the eBay power sellers. That let them dominate that market first and then expand.
As we bring all these ideas together, we have to talk about the role of humans and machines. There's so much anxiety about technology replacing jobs.
There is, but the sources argue this whole fear is based on a false premise. We have to go back to that first distinction. Globalization is substitution people and machines competing for the same jobs. But technology is complementarity. It lets us do new things.
Because humans and computers are fundamentally different. Computers are amazing at processing huge amounts of data. Humans are good at making judgments and having intentions.
The cat example is perfect. Google's supercomputer needed to analyze millions of YouTube videos to identify a cat with 75% accuracy. A 4-year-old can do it perfectly, instantly. The future isn't about replacing people, it's about empowering them.
And we saw this in action at PayPal with their fraud problem.
Yeah.
The automated software kept failing.
It failed because the enemy, the fraudsters, were adaptive humans. They could fool the rigid software.
So they developed the Igor system.
Which was a hybrid system. The computer would flag suspicious transactions, but a human operator would make the final judgment call. That man-machine team turned a $10 million monthly loss into a profit. And that's the core idea behind Palantir, too. Using computers to sift data, but relying on human analysts to find the actual insights.
So better tech won't replace lawyers or doctors. It will just empower them to do more complex work. The problem with big data is that it's often just dumb data. You need a human to connect the dots.
And the ultimate test case for this entire philosophy planning monopoly secrets is the story of clean tech.
Right. Investors poured $50 billion into this space, chasing this big, necessary idea of a cleaner world.
And what we got was a massive bubble and a string of bankruptcies like Solyndra. They failed because they got the answers to the 7 questions. Every business must answer completely wrong.
So let's run through them. The engineering question. Were they 10x better?
Almost never. Solyndra's solar panels were actually less efficient than standard ones. It was a marginal improvement at best. On timing, they were wrong. They thought solar would follow the exponential curve of Moore's law, but it was just improving slowly, linearly.
For monopoly, they aimed for trillion-dollar energy markets, which just meant instant, brutal competition.
The people question was a disaster. The teams were full of suits, not T-shirt-wearing engineers. They were good at getting government subsidies, not at building products.
What about distribution?
A total failure. One company, Better Place, spent $800 million and sold only 1,000 cars because their system was so complicated for customers. For durability, they got blindsided by competition from China and by the fracking boom, which made natural gas cheap and killed their business model.
And finally, the secret question. They didn't have one. Their only idea was the conventional wisdom that the world needed clean energy. They mistook a social need for a great business opportunity.
But Tesla is the exception that proves the rule. They got all 7 questions right. They had superior tech. They had perfect timing, getting a huge government loan right before the window closed. They achieved monopoly by dominating the high-end electric sports car niche first. They controlled their distribution.
And their secret.
Their secret was realizing that clean tech was a social phenomenon. They built a car that made its drivers look cool. That was the 0 to 1 insight.
So the lesson is that no sector is so important that just being in it is enough. You have to start at the micro scale with a superior monopolistic solution to a specific problem.
And that's the choice we face today. It's between stagnation and building something entirely new. We have to seek out those secrets and use them to build a future with intention.
And that choice, it applies to you, the listener, as much as anyone. The biggest danger might be becoming so certain of your own myth that you stop looking for the truth. But there's an equally insidious danger. Losing all sense of myth entirely and mistaking disenchantment for wisdom. You are not a lottery ticket. The future isn't random. It's waiting for us to build it.